Recording in progress. Got it.
Okay, you got it.
Welcome everybody to the Means of Production Garden here, celebrating the autumn of our 20th anniversary. We are on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Homaquim people, whose land this has been since time immemorial. We are here as squatters essentially on this stolen land, and it has been our great privilege to be the tenders of this garden that has been here for a mere 20 years now, that Oliver started 2002. So my name is Sharon Kallis. I'm with Earth Hand Gleaners Society.
My name is David Gowman. I'm also with Earth Hand Gleaners Society.
And we have a community member with us today.
I'm Carla Frankel. I'm
Hi.
most formally with the Strathcona Community Garden. And I'm also running for park board, so I'm looking at cool ways that land is stored in our parks to bring, cultural engagement and biodiversity into our parks.
Awesome.
So what I thought would be kind of fun to do today, Oliver, as a little bit of a game, so to speak, is when we hit intersections. So there are a few things in particular we want to show you in the garden that we're kind of excited about. I'm excited about. But I also thought when we hit a pathway, it's kind of like a participatory opportunity for you to say, turn left, turn right, go down the hill, go up the hill. So for you to kind of direct which way we're going. Okay.
Cool. Well, you'll be taxing my memory because it has been a long time, but
well, this
we'll
is
see
the
how we
joy
do.
of it, is you can just be looking on the screen and being, hey, what's down to the left? And we'll just kind of play it from that. Does that sound good?
Okay. Cool.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, you guys. And I guess I will do a land acknowledgement. Also, I'm speaking to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape along the banks of the East River on the island of Manhattan, New York, New York. The place so nice, they named it twice. And I'm very happy to be with all of you, and just delighted to have this opportunity to walk virtually through this amazing garden.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to just, if we can do a large pan here. Oh, I'm going to just turn around. So I'm facing north. Today we've had rain, and so I think the mountains have disappeared. But just as a point of reference, the staircase that is very, very new.
Amazing.
From when you would have been here. And I'm going to just come off to the side. Actually, maybe if I come down to the side of the stairs a bit, because this was the expansion that happened in 2018 or 2019, I guess, 1 year before the pandemic. So wow. Can you see how there's that kind of swath or triangle that runs between basically the tree line and the stairs?
Yes.
So that was space that the Parks Board asked us if we wanted to take over and do plantings on, because of course it was just too hard for operations to get equipment up and down the hill. So they've done rough terracing for us, and we've got so far some Phormium tenax and some daylily planted in there. Otherwise, it's a mix of pollinator plants. There's some red osier dogwood that we harvested for the first time last year.
Great.
Which tells me it would have been 4 years ago. And I'm just going to show you the view, because this is what always astounds me when I look at photos.
Turn the view around.
Is seeing where the garden shed is.
Wow.
And how big everything in those beds is right now.
That's crazy. That's just so crazy. If you would have seen the original pictures on the website, oliverk.org, there's pictures of the park before the first plantings, and it was nothing like that. It was just a bare, hard, packed lawn that had been, there's a lot of trash around, and water was running down onto Great Northern Way because the soil wasn't absorbing any moisture. So this is just a wonderful thing to see.
And the apple tree which has just gotten so huge in the last couple of years. And remarkably, we did a huge amount of pruning on it this year, and it's got all kinds of verticals that we're going to be harvesting. We've got a dye program coming up the end of this month. Anna Haywood Jones is doing a 3-part session on wood to wool natural dyes, looking at all of the fruit tree wood clippings, bark and leaves from the apple, the pear, the plum, and the cherry on site. So what I really wanted to show you up top here that I am the most excited about. Okay, I'm gonna do, like, you can just see, this is at my head height, how crazy that is. Kind of
pokeweed, is that what that is?
Pokeweed, yes, the
Yes.
pokeberry.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I wonder now, is that pokeweed from one of my original plantings, or did you plant that? Because we did plant some Himalayan pokeberry.
I got it.
Yeah. You okay?
I'm totally good. I'm paying attention to the camera and not to how I'm moving through the space. So no, that wasn't from you originally. We planted that about 5 years, maybe 7 years ago now. And this top area has taken a number of years to kind of find its way for what was going to do well. We had this as an annual residence bed for maybe 7 or 8 years. And it was a whole lot of work that wasn't really working particularly well in terms of how much support it required, and us not having finances to pay people and a lot of garden work on my end for cleanup and setup. So I decided to turn it into perennial and made this little path through. And so this is milkweed that I wanted to get established in here, and it has just done so incredibly well. So the milkweed and the pokeberry, milkweed for fiber, both from the stems and the pods, and then the pokeberry. And this one pokeberry here is like 12 feet tall.
Incredible.
But it's kind of crazy. That just speaks to the spring that we had this year.
Yeah, I've never seen one that big. They are native to the Northeast. And they've been, I think the Declaration of Independence was signed in Poke Inc.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and the leaves are eaten, but you have to be careful because they have a lot of oxalic acid, but they're native to this area. And they are kind of important in the food chain, like the berries. A lot of birds and stuff eat them, but they have a great pigment. The berry is a very beautiful color.
Yeah, and they are they're classed as toxic, so we're just always really careful to let people know, you know, take care.
Don't eat them.
Beware.
The berries are definitely toxic. I know the leaves are somewhat edible, but it's like one of those things that you have to prepare properly, otherwise it can be very bad for you.
Exactly. And then the daylily in here, I know we were talking about it last time around, so it's at harvest time. You can't even tell at this point, but I've already harvested with volunteers working with me, just probably 30 or 40 bundles of daylily coming from here. So it's just a really fantastic spot for being able to get the fibers for weaving. And there's the coreopsis doing super well.
Wow. Is your hat made out of daylily? Is that what that is?
Yeah, so the top of my hat is daylily and the sidewalls are fireweed.
Nice.
And my big excitement this year was, you can see there's like a white edge. So that's just fireweed seed that I figured out how to harvest it with ease and process it into making rope. And then the little brim there is stinging nettle.
That's so nice to see. The daylily, because of climate change, is really a good one to plant because it's very drought tolerant. It's also edible, and so and it's like hummingbirds like it, and it's just a really good one for this kind of landscape, low maintenance, and it's so great to see it being used for fiber. I didn't know about that, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's an incredible fiber plant. It's like my favorite thing to use for teaching people that are just getting started, because there's zero processing work to
Wow.
when working with it. You can just start weaving with it. And when we're looking for lessons to teach the concept of asking the plant for permission, it's one that you don't need any tools to cut. You just have a gentle tug and the leaf will release when it's ready to go. And so if you give a gentle tug and that leaf doesn't release, then it means the plant's not ready to see it go yet. And so it's this fantastic way for kids and adults to kind of get a sense. You know, I think if I show here, I can just kind of put my hand down and just by gently, you know, if I look underneath the plant, I can just start to pull up the ones. Generally, it's great to harvest them early in the day when they're a little damp from dew, but not quite this wet.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm going to come straight. All right, choices. Let's start this way. You're facing north. So we can either go to the east path or the west path to go down onto a terrace, sort of circle around the bamboo. So on the shed side or the stair side, what's your choice?
Oh, I don't know. Do the stair side. I mean, the stairs are so new to me that, yeah, I guess it won't make much difference, but just try that.
Okay. So I don't know if you remember the bamboo or the willow was cut when we were online last time together. I'm always amazed that this pathway disappears, which always feels like it couldn't possibly happen.
But it does, and actually that's what's so great. That's what's so great about these coppicing and pollarding techniques, is they actually increase the growth. It's so counterintuitive because people think that, you know, you're hurting the plant by harvesting it, but it actually stimulates more growth. And the idea too that you're making all these wonderful things, but also you're absorbing carbon from the atmosphere. So it works as a kind of climate change mitigator as well, and also a hydrological feature. So that's great. Wonderful, beautiful sculptural work on that willow there. Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, is that a nest?
Inside of the dome.
My goodness, that's so beautiful. Like a biotecture. That's so lovely. The Willow Dome.
Figure we could rent it out for about $800 a month at this point.
Yeah, you could do weddings and yeah.
No, I mean
Well,
just the dome.
But that's great. The stuff that you're doing with the dome and also the kind of arches and pillars is really forward thinking, because this is the kind of thing that, in terms of, you know, with climate change, again, to have shade in parks, to create these botanical shade structures. I mean, the Parks Department, you know, has come a long way since back in the day, but they used to like to put all the playground equipment in the middle of the scorching sun, which actually, when you have children or even adults, we shouldn't be out in the scorching sun, and to have some sort of shade is much nicer. So I can imagine a thing like this covering a playground, and it would be just wonderful.
Oh my gosh, that'd be amazing.
It's definitely getting used as a
Something
playground.
has happened to our screen there. I'm gonna just, oh, there we are.
I can see you guys fine.
Can you? Okay.
Yeah.
My camera is very, so we'll see. Something may or may not.
Yeah, no, you're coming through.
Coming through the Empresses. Let me take a moment to point out, Oliver, this is on its second year. That's that water chute there.
Amazing.
And then over here we have a 3-year-old on its third year, which is an 18-footer.
That's incredible. That's so great to see. You know, those all came from the train station originally. There was a couple Polonia in front of the Via station. They're still there. Yeah, you know, I propagated them all, and they were so easy to propagate, but there weren't many in East Vancouver, and I love them. They're classed in the Northeast here. They're kind of a weedy tree. They are limited by frost. There's a point where they don't self-propagate. Once you get north of, like, I don't know, southern New England, but here in New York, they're everywhere. In fact, looking out the window here, I see one coming out of somebody's fire escape. They just literally are such a tough tree. And the fact that they can be harvested like this is so wonderful. And, you know, they first came to North America as packing material for porcelain. The seeds are very fluffy, and they were brought in as like instead of styrofoam, they were brought as a shock absorbing packing for porcelain from China. And then the you know, when the crates were opened dockside, the seeds just blew all over the place. And so the whole Northeast is full of Polonia now. But the ones on the West Coast, I think, might have been deliberately planted. The ones at the train station, I think they were a gift from, I mean, the lore was that there was the Empress of China donated these trees. So I'm not sure if that's actually true, but they were
neat.
deliberately planted in
She's
Thornton Park.
I've been reading about that. Apparently she's named the same way the tree is named, like the Phoenix Empress.
Yeah.
And the Empress is called the Phoenix tree in Chinese.
Yeah, is that so? That's true. It wasn't just a rumor. There was always the kind of, you know, rumor in East Van that these trees were donated by the Empress of China, and you would see them in front of the Via station, and people would come out of the station in May when they were in full bloom, and they have these electric blue flowers, and they're going, "Oh my God, I'm in the tropics," right? But of course, they were in rainy old Vancouver. But I mean, it's still a tree that requires, you know, it can't be too cold. But they really seem to be doing well, and I think with climate change, they're only going to be doing better and better. And I love the way that you're pollarding them. That's so great. And are you still making your musical instruments?
Oh, my friend. I have pictures and videos to show you. It's yeah, still going gangbusters. I can't say enough about the wood. It's so incredible, the tonal quality and the remarkable lightness of it.
Amazing.
Out of
Yeah, built looms and built stilts using the wood. Yeah, very strong, lightweight.
That's
Still
great.
working 7 days in.
It's used for shoes in Japan, you know, the geta, the Japanese shoes, and then also cabinets for kimonos. But I would love to see, I mean, you're doing such a cool urban forestry thing. It'd be great to have like, you know, a few acres of Polonia to see what people could do, because it really is such a useful tree. And we haven't really even begun to scratch the surface in British Columbia, because
Be interesting to have it as a lumber source.
yeah, it does pretty well in the lower mainland. I think, you know, if you had a bit of a larger property in, I don't know, Richmond or someplace like that, it would probably do quite well.
Be worth a try.
I'm gonna just do a little shot of the
Pollard.
tree
Wow,
there. The leaves
beautiful.
get so big on it when it's been pollarded. It's amazing.
Yeah, they love that. It's so interesting. It really just really prefers to be pollarded. And of course, pollarded trees often live longer than unpollarded trees, which is a strange thing. Like something biochemically happens. There's coppice woodlands in the UK that are 1,000 years old. And because the management seems to extend the lifespan.
And so for the polonias, would you say that you start that on about year 7?
The pollarding?
Yeah.
Well, I think it depends. I think you guys have figured out the magic formula. It really depends on how quickly they grow. In colder areas, sometimes they die back, but if you get a good growth, you know, I think you could probably do it even sooner. It really is just a question of how vigorous the root system is, right? So, but it seems to be you've hit on the right timing. I mean, at a certain point, you know, it's too green to pollard, but once you start getting some wood, some cambium, I think it's whenever that happens is a good time. So it seems like that's worked out. It's so beautiful. I'm just seeing this beautiful space.
Isn't it lovely? Like this space in here, I really wanted to show you because you get no sense of it at all in the springtime when the willow is only 5 or 6 inches tall after our harvesting.
Incredible.
And it's the arches are strong enough that I can be up and kind of climbing in around to do the harvesting. So, which is really fantastic. You know, we kind of get out on a ladder, but then also being able to just kind of climb up into it. And then this as a room that stays like several degrees cooler than the air temperature when you just step out from this canopy is fantastic.
That's so
So
great.
I had a couple of questions that I wanted to ask you on behalf of somebody that is working at a garden in East Van, where they've got like a steep hill beside a SkyTrain station. And the land is owned by Metro Van TransLink, I guess. And they've got a community garden that they're going to be moving out of, and they're, you know, that land is being developed by the city now. And so they contacted me to say, planting on this steep hill, do you have any suggestions on how we could be planting for water conservation? And so I just thought it would be a good thing if there's anything you can share about what you were maybe doing when you were digging and planting this these terraces that would relate to keeping things as you know, on the water conservation side as possible, and some of that other consideration you might have had.
Well, I mean, I think the thing, you know, Vancouver is a very rainy city, but it has seasonal droughts, right? So you want to catch as much water as you can. And the technique that we used there was to dig basically ditches on the contour of the hill. So if you imagine a map with contour lines, following like the contours of the hill so that the water would spread sideways and not go down the hill whenever it did rain. And the ditches were filled with mulch, wood chips and leaves, whatever we could get. And then we planted willow from cuttings. So basically just sticks that were stuffed in the ground during dormancy. So that would have happened in winter or early spring. And then the first year we did have to water, we had a drip irrigation system, which I rescued from some abandoned marijuana grow operation. But that got them established. And then once they were established, they need less supplemental water. A lot of it depends on the site. You know, the means of production is a north-facing slope, so it's not quite as hot as a south-facing slope. But I do think that willow is a good candidate for most sites in Vancouver, provided you can get it established. It's good in cities because deer tend to browse it pretty heavily, but if there's no deer around, it tends to do super well. So digging ditches on contour. I did a similar work in the Grandview Cut where it was the same kind of problem right by the Victoria Drive Bridge. There was real problem with landslides, and it was the soil was very wet and it was sort of falling down the hill. So I did the same thing. I planted willows on contour. There I didn't dig ditches. It was so wet. I just literally stuck the cuttings in very deeply, but still on contour. And then they rooted and they held the slope together enough for other native trees to move in, like alder and big leaf maple and cottonwood. So basically planting on contour. And the willow is great because you can really cut a lot of twigs during the dormant season. The one that we planted in the cut was a very common willow called Salix purpurea. And I think some of the ones there at MLP are Salix purpurea as well. So there are certain willows that are particularly good at erosion control. They have very vigorous root systems, whereas some of the willows that you have there are specific for basket making. So they may be more about the quality of the twigs than the root system. So a little bit of research, but I know the Salix purpurea is a good one for erosion control, but it can be used for baskets. I think you might have used some, right, Sharon? Didn't
Yes.
you?
Yeah, absolutely. The yellow, which is what's overhead, is inclined to bruise or bend, as like not bend, but kind of crease is the word I'm looking for, compared to the purpurea up at the top.
Right.
I think this is a Navajo variety. It's great for fences. It's great for large basketry, like land work is what we use it for versus the smaller. So that was the other end that we were at, the west end. Here we are back up towards the bamboo. So
Cool.
you have a path choice. I can turn around again.
This is like a video game. It's great.
It's totally, I know.
I
I
need the
thought
glasses.
I'd keep you entertained. So up ahead, there is a path on the left. I can go down into the hazels. I can go all the way straight
Why
to
don't
the
you
end.
do that? Yeah, why don't you do that? Whatever feels right, because you're having to navigate. The hazels were from Cortez Island, actually, and
Were they?
yeah, they were. I brought them down from Linnea Farm. Actually, there's a lot of interesting history. The willows, before we get to the hazels, were from mostly Alistair Heseltine, who is an amazing basket crafts person and artist. So he donated a lot of willows that are unusual and specifically, grown for making, for basketry. So there's things like black mall and other named varieties of willows in that plantation that were meant to be kind of like a library of willows, so that people could propagate them and have, each one has its own kind of unique qualities. But I'm not a guy who can make a basket, so I just planted them. But so that came from, and he's on, I think he was on, was he Hornby or Denman? I can't remember.
He's on Hornby, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he was on Hornby, but the the hazels came from Cortez Island, from Linnea Farm, which had an extensive plantation of hazels, which many of them were nut bearing, but they're really, really great because the hazel, again, is traditionally coppiced in coppiced woodlands in the UK and Northern Europe. And it's a great plant because it has a lot of nuts, obviously, but the great thing about coppicing hazel is the hazel rods, I guess you'd call them. You can split them very, very easily for a long, like all the way along the long rod, and it really has a great quality of splitting. So they could be hundreds of years old, thousands of years old, coppiced hazel woodlands. So they're kind of a great thing. Now there is a native hazel. This is not the native hazel. This is the European Corylus avellana, but there is a native one, which is very similar. I think it's Corylus. I think it's called the beaked hazel, and that's the town of Hazleton is named after the hazels. So there's little pockets all around the coast, but we planted the European one because we had lots of it, and it was also quite similar to the native one. But it's one of these great plants because it has a great structural characteristic, but it also feeds people. And as grain becomes harder to grow, nuts are going to become a big thing because they can tolerate more extremes in weathers. So if the squirrels don't get them all, of course.
Yeah, right. I'm just going to show you, and I have a question about the hazelnuts in a minute, but I wanted to show, again, I think I pointed it out last time, or David did, this bump out that we built. We call it the beach.
Great.
And it was just, a part of the ongoing terracing where
cool.
several of them are hazels. And then it's the yellow willow that was woven as the front. And then it's like a lot of the excess branches and wood that we had on site that were just kind of buried in and then filled up with wood chips. And I'm just noticing we've got a little hazel coming up now out of here, but it's been fantastic. Good. It means we can stand on that now and harvest this willow. You can see where David is. So much easier now to actually be harvesting that.
That's wonderful.
One of the things that means of production is challenging for is having a space that is a flat enough, open enough terrain to have a group of people that you can stop and sit with or stand with in a circle to kind of, open and close a session or have a conversation. And so this has actually become quite a beautiful little gathering place now that we've had various classes or stewardship people. It's kind of a favorite spot for drinking beer, I think, now in the community.
That's great. That's wonderful, because the site was the reason that I got to do the project there to begin with the Environmental Youth Alliance back all those years ago, 2002, is because it was the problematic site. Like, it was a slope. It was not easy for the city to maintain because ride-em moors don't do very well on steep slopes. That could get very dangerous. And also there was hydrological problems, and there was also like people just didn't use the space in a very kind of kind way. Like, it was basically used to dump garbage or to kind of just walk through. But the idea that this could be a productive, interesting space that engages the public as opposed to just a place to move through was kind of the philosophy. But it's a complicated space because it was on a slope, right? So
Yeah.
and I'm glad to see what you've done there, because that was always the big challenge, is even just planting, you know, when you're on a slope, you know, with wheelbarrows and stuff, it just got harder and harder. So we tried to do terracing from the get-go, but it took a long time because we didn't want to do any kind of hard landscaping. We always
Yeah.
wanted to work with just the soil and what was there. So I'm really pleased to see how in 20 years it's really evolved. And you know, these old terracing techniques go back to the, you know, beginnings of human, you know, agriculture. And this also, the great thing about what I'm seeing on the screen is I really see this as a giant sponge too. So like when it does rain, it's really gonna recharge the water table. And because really it was creating problems. I mean, there was literally water pouring down the hill and onto Great Northern Way. So, and then going into the sewers. But first of all, it was hard for the cars, but then it actually, you know, all of the rainwater that doesn't get absorbed by the landscape goes into the storm sewers, which ultimately, you know, causes all kinds of problems. So the idea of having the land absorb the water in the way that it was intended was really part of the function of this original design.
That's awesome. And I just want to point out again, I know I always do this, but this is, I think, one of my favorite parts of the garden are these stairs that David has put up that I think of as being kind of like the crooked spine that travels through. And it's urbanite, broken up concrete that we've salvaged over the years from a lot of gas stations. It used to be easy here to get broken up concrete from the gas stations that were being decommissioned. It's much harder now. Everybody's got like modulock fencing and almost barbed wire around places, but there's a ton of construction going on here now, and David has been very successful again this year. After a bit of a dry period, we've managed to get a few more. So it's funny to think of, you know, bringing concrete into the garden, but in a site like this, it's really served a purpose for giving sort of solid footholds. And this space is, David's made a really beautiful informal performance venue where this central hazel is kept cut fairly clean, as opposed to the others. You can see that one as well is clean, and then they have the rods for harvesting every 4 to 5 years further along. But
that's wonderful.
This is kind of, you know, it's all these informal terraces for performers. And then where David is sitting is actually the drummer's stone.
Oh, that's great. Nice. Well, you know, the urbanite or concrete, it's really a great material because, again, you know, concrete is a great, it uses up a lot of, or it generates a lot of carbon. So, you know, when they make cement, vast amounts of carbon are released because a lot of heat it has to be used to, you know, create the lime that's used in the cement. And so by reusing it, you really are, you know, doing the planet a favor, because there's a lot of embodied carbon in there. And so, and it's a great material. Like it has, I mean, it'll last forever, and it has rough surface, so it's nice to walk on, and it's really kind of it is a type of geology. It's like an urban geology, and why not use it? It makes perfect sense. It's the natural sort of bedrock now of much of the built environment is in fact concrete. So good on you for doing that.
So I've just come out onto the new concrete pad that was installed.
Nice.
So you can see here we're on the eastern edge. There's the park bench that was put in, and the red osier dogwood right behind, which we harvested for the first time this year, and wove the fencing to go around the edges and around the other parts of the garden were woven with the red osier that grew on site, which was really exciting and kind of lovely to be able to do with all of our stewards.
And that's a native plant, right?
Yeah, that's the red osier dogwood.
Yeah. So that's what's interesting about the site is it incorporates native and non-native species. And, it's interesting. These sites, I mean, although it's being used as a performance site and a materials plantation, but it does attract a lot of wildlife as well. And so the thought was that by having a real diverse, biologically diverse site, it would continue to attract, birds and butterflies and whatnot. Are you seeing many birds and insects?
There's so many birds through here, tons of birds, and there's squirrels. Unfortunately, there's also cats, which I've got complex feelings about from the neighborhood. But there's a lot of birds that are on site. Hummingbirds,
Oh, really?
families of flickers. I think we've got at least 2 skunk families that have been living underneath the shed at Means of here in the garden
Nice.
for a number of years.
See, none of that
yeah.
was there before. And it's so interesting. It was the same over at Cottonwood. When we first started Cottonwood in 92, which is like 10 years before that, there was nothing. It was just basically empty wasteland. And then eventually it became really biologically diverse with like hawks and eventually eagles and, birds of all kinds of birds and eventually frogs. And, so these little projects, I mean, they're small in terms of, area, acreage, but they're like a green oasis. They attract wildlife and create sustainability. And you guys are doing all this cool stuff, which produces a material supply chain for creative people, right? So it's like a multiple functions landscape. And I'm so happy to see it because, people can study this and say, hey, why aren't all parks? I mean, the idea that you're stewarding it, you've been stewarding this for 20 years and people will come forward. I mean, you guys are such great examples of creative people who've really just done amazing stewardship work. And I don't know, I just think this model could be exported to other sites. It's a much more active landscape. It's not passive. And you're continuing to involve yourselves and in a way that the landscape is starting to take on the sort of appearance of like the people who use it, right? Like the idea that it's a open source landscape, that you're creating the landscape over years of stewardship. And that's what's so beautiful about it. It's like, it's so ever changing. And I just love this as a model. I'd love to see this like spread.
Yeah, I'd love to see that too. And I was really hesitant when David and I first started doing the tending here. We were working with Environmental Youth Alliance, who you'd started the project with, and I was really clear about sort of setting boundaries that we would tend the art crops, but like the fruit crops, they needed to still be managing just because of time and capacity. But when EYA stepped out of the project and Earth Hand stepped in 2016 or 17, and we started working and learning more about tending the fruit crops, I just started to realize more and more the lack of a line between the two. Like when you're tending the fruit trees, those are also harvesting opportunities for art materials, whether it's bark for dye pots, whether it's the wood for buttons, or making mallets. Like hardwood is fruit wood is hardwood. So where those opportunities then began to, I think, expose themselves more, and just kind of take away that boundary, just really blurred.
That's great to hear, Sharon, because the original plan was using permaculture principles, which is all about multiple functions. The idea that something could be providing food and fiber and shade and wildlife habitat and hydrology, mitigation of runoff. And so the idea that everything can be multiple functions, that was the plan. And so I'm glad it's working out that way. I mean, I didn't know if this was going to work. I mean, I had no idea. These projects are experiments, and the hope was that it would work. But I mean, I was always trying to sell these ideas to the very patient people at the Vancouver Parks Board who put up with me back in the day. But it was like a proposition. It's like, will this work? Will people be interested in this? Will people come forward and take care of it? And we didn't know. We really didn't know. I mean, it was just a sort of a question mark, right? So
yeah.
It's lovely to see this, because hopefully now, bootstrapping on your success. I mean, it would be great to just see, I know in Seattle, they're doing like a big fruit forest, but the idea of these kind of fiber plantations and art supply materials plantations, which really do help with climate change. You've shortened the supply chain and also allowing people to plant what it is that they're likely to use. I mean, David's relationship to the Polonia, it's almost like he's become a relative of the Polonia. Like he just kind of has co-evolved with the Polonia over the years. It's so great to see, right?
Well, I think I just touched something and I muted. No, we're good.
No, you're good. You're
Okay.
so good. Yeah.
I wanted to show you, I've walked down to this end because this is very exciting. This is a persimmon tree that was donated to us by a community steward who came out and volunteered with us a few times. Jamshed grew up in Iran and had this growing on his balcony, and he was like, it needs some land. Could you plant it? And I was like, totally. And look, there is the very first persimmon.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Isn't that exciting?
It's exciting. And what's great is at Cottonwood, we planted persimmons at the very beginning. The idea was that we figured it was going to get hotter, right? Because of climate change. And sure enough, it mostly is. I mean, this year, I know you've had a cool summer, but on average, the temperatures are going up. And I think that Vancouver will be producing lots of persimmons. I mean, obviously we need the trees, but increasingly, at first they would never have a fruit, right? And now they're starting to fruit more regularly because of the hotter conditions. So within a few years, if the trend, I mean, and global warming is a very destructive process, but adapting to it by planting things like persimmons, which can grow in hotter conditions, is really a wise thing to do. So hopefully within, certainly our lifetimes, there'll be good crops of persimmons, and maybe that's okay. Maybe our climate there in Vancouver might be more like Portland, and less like it was even, when I first moved there in the 80s.
Right. I don't know if you could hear, when you speak of birds, there was sounded like an eagle overhead and some big birds squawking. So something is going on.
Nice.
But yeah, I wanted to just say, in terms of, recognizing like how to build a project like this for success, a couple of things that I think about. One is, growing art materials is really obscure to try and sell people on, and even kind of like, talk about super niche marketing of who's going to be engaged or interested. And so the number of people that come to volunteer and work with us because they're interested in the food forest, and then suddenly they're like, oh, you can make rope. Oh, that's how easy it is to make rope. Oh, I can make rope with all of what natural dyes, I can dye with this. And so the food forest almost becomes the hook to call people in,
drug.
Something they can relate to.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool. But then the other thing, when I think about like building projects like this for success, and when I look at Trillium, and I got involved here in 2007 as kind of very peripheral volunteer, and the garden was 5 years old at that point. And it was a couple of years before anything really got going. And Trillium, it was 7 years before things got going. And so I think for any municipality or community group that's wanting to do something like this, recognizing they need a 7-year commitment of what their plans are going to be, that are going to kind of build some engagement and have like, this is where easy annual plants that you can be starting to kind of build excitement with while you wait for those other plants to kind of mature and reach the point of harvesting and working with and learning about and learning from. But yeah,
Absolutely.
that are kind of the annual crops initially that you're starting with, and then being able to build longer term towards. And honestly, I don't know how a place like Means of Production would function if it wasn't for having David and I as stewards that have social housing.
Yeah.
This is my little, flag waving for universal basic income, because honestly,
Yeah.
most people have to work just too freaking much and too damn hard to have
Yeah.
the capacity to do the work that David and I do without pay. They
That's
might
right.
want to, they just, their lives don't account for it. And I'm really aware for David and I that it's been our social housing that we're in that's allowed us to be dedicating as much time as we give to this space.
I totally hear that, and that's kind of why I left the city, because I had to work elsewhere. And it's a huge issue. Like when I was early on involved with starting Cottonwood Gardens, I too was in social housing. I was in a co-op, and it afforded me the time to do this kind of work for no pay. And they were getting little grants here and there, but it wasn't really enough to live off of. So these projects, you need the time to do them, and you need the time to steward them, and you need the time to think about how they are going to work over long periods of time, which implies you need some stability, right? Because if you're moving around all the time, like, I don't know, you move to Burnaby or you move to Richmond, you wouldn't be able to have that sort of relationship to place, right? So, and this is a similar problem here in New York. I mean, the garden behind my building where I am now has been around since the early 80s. And the reason that these gardens got started is the area was very low income, and a lot of people were squatters. And so they were living basically for no rent or very low rent. And that's what allowed people the time to build these gardens and take care of them and create community around them. And they still exist, and they're part of the urban landscape now. But it really is so hard for people to have a kind of stability of place when their housing is constantly up for grabs. And unfortunately, artists tend not to make enough money to pay market rents. So yeah, this is really something that I see it in Vancouver, but I see it in other places as well. And it's tragic, really. With your own volunteers, I'm sure you have a fair amount of churn as to people moving out of the neighborhood, and because they can't afford to live there anymore.
Yep, absolutely. I want to just show, oh my goodness, the sun is coming out. That's awesome. So we're down. This is basically the green waste zone now, which you'll probably remember, where you can hear, I'm sure, the noise.
Yeah.
And probably just make out the cars down at the end there.
Yeah. So beautiful, though. It's so different from how it first looked. I mean, I just was looking at old pictures today on my website, and it was just this barren,
right?
hill.
Isn't that crazy?
Totally
so
crazy.
this is the most furthest westerly edge.
Mhm.
And so, you can see the blackberry is kind of up along the side, and we've got an area that we've just kind of cleared. We've worked probably about 20 feet all the way up this stretch of removing blackberries over the last 4 years, I'm guessing. And kind of replanting up at the top. There's some sumacs and goldenrod and asters. And
Nice.
my kind of big hope is to get a nice little fireweed field where that swath of blackberries is now. That in another 3 years, if we do this, I'll be showing you fireweed.
Nice. And that's over by the apartment building that's next adjoining property. Yeah.
And there's pathways here. So here's kind of the first. So it says closed for season, stinging nettle and wasps. I'm just, this is the first year I've done this. Last year, I realized that this kind of wild zone, as we think of it, in behind the Mahonia and the mock orange here, is planted with all kinds of stinging nettles and some fireweed. And it's a really beautiful zone, but people keep schwacking and breaking the nettles because they want to walk through the paths. And it's like, no, I'm going to just get complaints about nettle, and I want the nettle to have a chance to live so that we can be
Yeah.
working with it later. So anyway, I've cut off, but you can see if I hold that up, like this is, so
Mhm.
there are these, I could actually use the camera and just check and see if there's any garbage in there. I haven't been in so long.
Mm. It's so great to see, Sharon. The nettle, I love the way that you've been using it. I've been following your Facebook posts, but also nettle is a vital plant for many insect species. Butterflies in particular use nettle.
Oh, yes.
So it's super important. And, it's always a question of striking the right balance. I mean, people want to walk around and people do damage. I know at Cottonwood, we did some work with black locust, and we cut it kind of short because it's very thorny, and it created areas that were very thorny and hard to get into, so that we could maintain we could keep people where we wanted people to be and not where we didn't. So using plants like that way is important. I'm loving the bamboo here. That
Isn't that
bamboo,
awesome?
that is actually quite an unusual bamboo. A lot of those bamboos are chosen specifically for their use as craft material. So they were mostly from Salt Spring originally. There's a couple of bamboo people are like really kind of, it's like a cult, like they're very into it. And so I went to a bamboo farm and bought like bamboo rhizome, which is basically like the underground roots. And but you buy it by the foot from these crazy hippies on Salt Spring. And so we have some really beautiful and rare bamboo species. In fact, the bamboos there and the bamboos in Cottonwood are very, very good collection of unusual temperate zone bamboos. It's probably one of the better collections that's publicly accessible in Canada, because bamboo doesn't grow very well east of the Rockies. So you pretty much have a good collection there. And again, it can be propagated and it's a great material. It really is really wonderful. And is that hops I'm looking at there?
No, those are well, that's a golden hops vine.
Nice.
Right there. And yeah, I feel I'm gonna have to go back and listen. If you gave the species variety of the bamboo, I'm gonna have to go back and listen.
I'll look it up for you. I have a map somewhere. The hops are interesting too, because the area just immediately to the east of you along Clark Drive, at one point back, earlier in the colonization cycle, there were a lot of breweries there. And you can find wild hops. And I actually taught a permaculture course in the early 90s beneath one of those giant billboards. It was at the corner of Terminal and Clark, and we all went in there. And there was this whole kind of orchard of hazelnuts and hops that had just sort of spontaneously come up. The hops were left over from the breweries that were all along Falls Creek. And Falls Creek extended all the way to Clark Drive at one point. And there was actually a creek up there called Brewery Creek, right? So
yeah, of course.
Yeah, so there were all these breweries, and the hops would get dumped, I guess, when they finished the brewing. And some of them, I don't know how that worked, but there's wild hops that maybe they either grew them, or maybe when they threw the spent hops away, they managed to propagate them somehow. But there was all these little patches of wild hops along Clark Drive at one point. So it's a kind of beer is like, seeping from the land there.
Yeah. Here's the other side. There's kind of a couple of sumacs you can see.
Nice.
There's the one in here, and the other. They're not a staghorn. I'm trying to remember what variety.
I think it looks like the smooth sumac. It's native to the east here.
I'm hoping they've got as high of a tannin content, which is why I wanted, because sumac is super high in tannins.
Yes.
For mordanting fiber. And then there's goldenrod and asters in here, and a whole lot of morning glory. This zone has been kind of closed off, and I'm just thinking Wednesday night is going to be when we do some more control of the blackberry and the bindweed in this zone.
Now, do you use that for anything, Sharon? The bindweed and the morning glory? Is
You
that?
know what? I don't. You can use it for some decorative crochet and
Mhm.
knitting and sort of
Mhm.
sculptural
Mm.
weaving work. I don't find it's very strong.
Hmm.
It's beautiful. It's got such a beautiful deep burgundy color, but it doesn't last very long. It tends to be a little brittle when it dries. I'm going
I
to just
see.
show before we end here. I have here, I showed you this in, I think, in our last walk. So here's the little Osage Orange
Nice. Osage
that
Orange,
has,
yes.
it's survived the summer and the summer
Yeah.
drought with an area that has zero irrigation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there it is, only being watered a couple of times, and it's
Yeah.
grown definitely 7 or 8 inches this year. So
Nice. They like heat. I mean, they're native to the Midwest,
right,
and they do like heat. But again, the lower mainland is getting hotter, and a lot of those things I think will start doing better over time. You know, we here in New York, I mean, it's so hot. It's you know, like we get 90 degrees Fahrenheit every day. I mean, less so now, but we're in the 80s now. But it's just so brutally hot that a lot of those things like the Osage Orange, they love heat. And but I think you'll get enough heat there that some of those things will be more possible to grow. And so you'll gradually, I mean, it's happening. The sad thing about climate change is it's happening faster than we had anticipated.
Yeah.
So you may find it starting to get a growth spurt, you know, even in a
Yeah.
few years.
yeah. Yeah, and I'm just going to show you behind me, because this kind of blows me away, the scale of that cypress tree
No, it's crazy.
behind the
Wow,
shed.
that's gotten so huge. Wow, that was
always-
just a little tree before. Wow.
I know, right?
Uh,
Yeah, and the same as well with the cottonwood that's behind me.
yeah, wow,
there's,
that's enormous.
Just kind of a
Wow.
grandmother of the community now.
You know, it's interesting because 20 years, I look back at this project and 20 years doesn't seem that long, but it's crazy long. And so, you know, we've kind of lived 20 years and this idea that these landscapes will outlive us. And so you're a steward, but the idea of like this future of the landscape, because trees live a lot longer than people, and this idea that it will be a permanent part of the commons in a sense, this idea of commoning practices. And so when we planned the original plantings, it was with an eye to succession so that some things would mature quickly, like you were talking earlier about the annual plants. But then there were longer term plantings like the ash trees. I don't know if they made it, but we thought we'd make, I don't know, hockey sticks at some point, you know, but that might be when I'm like in a wheelchair, like really old. And, you know, but the idea that there'd be this kind of plan for the time of the sort of life cycle of these various plantings to play out. And some of them were in like months and some of them were in decades, right? So
Yeah.
so it's an interesting thing to have to think about. I mean, the Native First Nations folks, you know, thinking in terms of 7 generations, right? So these places are really one of those things where you now have to think like, what's it going to look like in 100 years, you know, and who's going to look after it? And so it's a very interesting set of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of remarkable how much has changed in the last 20 years. It makes me really excited to see what the next 20 years is
Yeah,
going to bring, you know?
hopefully we'll be
and,
around
you know,
to drink some craft beer.
Yeah, and my big goal is to be able to step out of doing all the earth hand programming and just be in the gardens full time. That's kind of my my
Nice.
retirement hope right now. I think
Good
I'm going
for
to just
you.
show you. I think this is one of our biggest bamboos that we've had in a while.
Lovely.
Yes.
Yeah,
Well, I
and a
think,
nice thing is you can keep harvesting it, which is so great.
Right. Yeah. I think we can pause or stop our recording now. Thanks, folks.
Alrighty, I
Listen
will
to
stop.
this. Thanks for
Uh,
joining us.
Okay, and what I'll do is I will stop the recording.